A number of viewers have sent me a link to an article by Nick Gottlieb in the January 2025 issue of Canadian Dimension, and it's titled, "To Respond to Trump's Tariffs, Canada Should Nationalize Its Oil Industry." I want to give you the argument about why Canada should not nationalize its oil industry. Let's first of all go over some of Nick's argument. Basically, he says, Trump is being aggressive towards our economy. We've got tariffs. We've got other problems that he's created with trade policy. He's threatened to annex our, Canada. I mean, on and on and on. Canadians are familiar with the threat posed by U.S. President Donald Trump. So Nick's argument is that nationalizing the oil companies would have a number of benefits. So first of all, it would help Canada reclaim economic sovereignty. Now, frankly, I don't know what that is. What is economic sovereignty? And if you nationalize the oil companies, would it make a difference with respect to all of the other parts of the economy that are foreign owned? We're a small, open economy. This has always been a feature of Canada, and foreign direct investment, as they say, is a feature, not a bug. So, not sure I buy that one. Reduced dependence on U.S. capital, it's the same argument. We need capital from outside the country because we don't have enough ourselves. Align better with climate justice and Indigenous reconciliation goals. This may come as a big surprise, but the Alberta-based industry has actually done a pretty good job of employing Indigenous people in northern operations, or in operations generally, but especially in the north, and also contracting out to Indigenous businesses or First Nation-owned and Métis-owned development corporations, and they really have done a good job. I mean, and it's not, of course it helps that, to have local suppliers, but it's more than that. I mean, they're pretty savvy and they understand that appearing to align their interests with Indigenous groups is good PR for them. So there's a healthy dose of that in there too. They're not altruistic on this. Now, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why Canada should not, under any circumstances, ever nationalize its oil companies. First one, this morning, a couple of hours ago, I interviewed Emma Goss, who's an energy researcher with DNV. It's a Norwegian-based but international firm that does risk assessment. And every year they put out an energy transition report. So the 2025 report just came out. And she was saying that they expect peak oil demand before 2030 and peak gas demand around 2035. So, peak oil is only a few years away. And then, of course, there'd probably be a plateau followed by decline. And the reason is exact same reason that we argue here, which is electrification of transportation, primarily in Asia, but also in Europe and to a lesser extent, North America and other countries. So that's number one, is why would you buy oil and gas assets on the eve of their market peak? And so you'd buy them at their highest value, the assets at the highest value, only a few years before they begin to decline. And, demand falls, prices become more volatile, maybe they become quite low. And so it's the absolute worst time to buy those assets. And you would have to, just nationalize them and make them the property of the federal government. You have to pay for them. So bad decision there. 2, and this is something that is not well understood in Alberta, but never, the rest of the country too. And that is the Alberta-based oil and gas industry has a horrendous overhang of environmental liabilities. Now, how big is it? As much as $260 billion worth of unfunded liabilities. And the reason for this is because Alberta, like every other oil jurisdiction in North America, it wasn't just Alberta, but 100 years ago, they prioritized the financial health and profits and revenues to government and employment over taking security at the beginning of an oil and gas asset's life. So when you drill a well, that's the best time to take some kind of security. It could be insurance, could be a bond, could be cash, whatever it is. But when that, you know, 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road, when that well is depleted and you have to clean it up, now there's money to do that. But that's not what Alberta did. Alberta said, we're going to have them, the oil companies, pay at the end of the asset's life. Well, of course, there's no money left. It's depleted. And so the oil companies are immediately incented to go out and try to palm those depleted assets off on somebody else. And that's exactly what they did. So there's this whole huge inventory of these old assets that will need to be cleaned up. And why would you buy a company that has those kind of assets, that liability attached to the assets? That's crazy. You wouldn't do that. So let's not bail out the oil companies, okay? Their markets are going to change, and they have all these liabilities they're going to have to pay for at some point. Why have the taxpayer do that? Now, here's the third reason, and it's a little different, but there's only so much capital to go around, right? I mean, this has been a perennial problem when if the government's going to be involved in economic development, and it always is. There's, investment tax credits, there's subsidies, there's all kinds of stuff that governments do to provide support to the business community. But there's only so much of it. Why would you spend it on nationalizing oil companies instead of investing it in emerging industries? And the favorite illustration here is we've championed the Bitumen Beyond Combustion program of Alberta Innovates for, a better part of a decade, because bitumen is a very, very, very unique hydrocarbon molecule. Instead of a chain, it's a sheet. And because it's a sheet, according to Dr. Paula Bombend, who's the chief chemist at Alberta Innovates, because it's a sheet, you can manipulate it much, much better than you can if it were a chain, like a simple hydrocarbon. And so actually sending it to refineries in the US and then burning it as gasoline and diesel is the worst value. It's the worst thing you could do. The best value is to make something with it. So if you got $50 for a barrel of oil you sent to the States, you turn it into carbon fiber, you get $200. You've added that much value. So those are the industries that should receive government support, because invariably they come out of the lab and then they go to a pilot project, and then eventually they run into the valley of death, where they need help getting up to commercialization and then scaling up to global scale. That would be that is a great use of public capital to de-risk technologies that then will have significant benefits to the economy. And if you built an advanced materials manufacturing sector in Alberta using bitumen as a feedstock, you'd have a domestic market for the oil sands industry. You'd have a whole new industry that would employ Albertans and other Canadians, and then you'd have the supply chains for that industry, which should be local businesses that provide inputs into that. And you might even have forward-linked industry. So you take the carbon fiber and then you go make something else with it, and you have businesses established to do that, because they build close to the source of the input. So I think I've laid out a pretty good argument, but I understand the attraction of Nick Gottlieb's argument. I mean, we've been debating public ownership since certainly a lot of the last century. And when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s and going to university in the late 70s and early 80s, public ownership was a big deal, and it was seen as a tool of economic development. And so this debate that he raises is not new at all. And it used to be premiers like Peter Lougheed in Alberta from 1971 to 86. He nationalized assets, like an airline, Pacific Western Airline, or he created new crown corporations to undertake work that the private sector wouldn't do. and Aostra, and that's how the petrochemical complex in Alberta got started, is because intervention by Lockheed through the Alberta government. So I understand the emotional appeal to Nick and people who favor public ownership like he does in this case, but it's just not practical. I mean, peak oil demand is coming. The value of the asset's going to drop very, in the near future. Environmental liabilities that are just we need a synonym for enormous that is bigger than gargantuan or humongous, because that's how huge these liabilities are, unfunded liabilities. And then we could make better use of that capital. Put it all together, and I think it's a compelling argument to not ever nationalize Canada's oil companies.